Hello, this is Yogeshwar 7000 again, and I'm back with another very interesting topic and very important topic, rather, which is on retrograde planets. And today we'll be discussing about the planet Mercury. So, as we all know, that in a Vedic birth chart, what we consider is Sun and Moon out of the nine planets, they're always direct, they're not retrograde. What is retrograde? First of all, what is retrograde? Retrograde is when, if you look at a birth chart, there are planets which are marked retrograde, meaning which they're moving backwards. As we all know that planets move ahead, jumping from one zodiac sign to another in the anti-clockwise direction from the first house to the second, to the second, to the third, depending on where their position is, of course. So planets move direct and they move ahead in the direction where they move from one zodiac sign to another, and they move in the forward direction, meaning which from Cancer they'll move to Leo, and from Leo they'll move to Virgo, from Aries they'll move to Taurus, so on and so forth. Straight direction, or direct direction rather, which we call in Sanskrit, we call them Margi, M-A-R-G-I. And in certain cases you will see them as represented as retrograde with a little r there, meaning which they are not moving ahead, they are moving in the backward direction, which is in Sanskrit called Vakri, V-A-K-R-I, or retrograde in English. So what exactly is retrograde? Retrograde, there is nothing called a retrograde actually. First of all, because all the planets move around the sun, they're all moving in the direction, in a direct motion, they're not moving backwards at all. Then why do we show them in the birth chart as retrograde? The reason is, it's very simple, that from the planet Earth, the other planets may appear to move in a backward direction or a retrograde direction in certain times rather. And I'm not going to get there. There are ways to determine what times you can figure out what planet will be retrograde in a year or not, but I'm not going to get into that mathematical detail. But there are times where planets appear to go backwards from Earth. Since we're drawing the chart here on planet Earth, when we draw a Vedic chart, when those planets appear to go backwards, it's in a kind of an illusion. Actually, not, you could use the word illusion, but relatively, because Earth is also going around the sun and the other planets are also, so relatively there are situations when those planets appear to go backwards. So when they appear to go backwards in the Vedic chart, we capture them as moving backwards or retrograde. And interestingly, as per Vedic astrology, whenever those planets appear to go backwards or are retrograde in a birth chart, sitting here from the planet Earth, then their effects are different. They do not behave on the humans the same way as if they were direct. So that's why the study of retrograde planets is extremely important, and mention has been made in the ancient scriptures about planets when they get retrograde. Now, we know that Sun and Moon, when we draw a birth chart, they will never appear to be going backwards or retrograde. So in a birth chart, you will never ever see, when you draw a birth chart, and Moon going retrograde. Even in transits, you'll never see, sitting here from Earth, that Sun and Moon are retrograde. That's point number one to remember. Point number two is, sitting here from planet Earth, we will always see that, of course, Rahu and Ketu are never seen, they are shadow planets, but they will always be retrograde. The way their motion has been calculated mathematically, as per Vedic astrology, when we draw a chart, they will always move in the up in the reverse direction, or they'll always be retrograde, meaning which instead of moving from one zodiac ahead, like for example, if they were in Cancer, they will not move ahead into Leo, they will move in the backward direction to Gemini. Or if they're in Aries, they'll move to Pisces. So they'll always, Rahu and Ketu will always go in the opposite direction. So Rahu moves and Ketu also moves in the opposite direction because they're just opposite to each other. So that's another point to remember. And so we'll be talking only about 5 retrograde planets, because only 5 planets can go retrograde or appear moving in the opposite direction while we're sitting here on planet Earth. So that's how we prepare the Vedic birth chart, both for individuals and even in transits when we see those planets. So what are those planets? Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, Mars, and Venus. Only these 5 planets. And today we'll be discussing about the planet Mercury. And how does it go retrograde, and what are the effects of a Mercury retrograde on the planet Earth and on the humans living on planet Earth and their lives. So first of all, we have to understand as to what are the significations of the planet Mercury. The planet Mercury represents intellect. That's very important. The intelligence comes from planet Mercury. And as far as the professions are concerned, it rules over traders, businessmen, the stock market, speech, humor. All these things are represented by the planet Mercury. So whenever the planet gets retrograde in somebody's chart, or when you see a retrograde Mercury in somebody's chart, I'm not talking about transits. Of course, the transits, whenever Mercury gets retrograde in transit as well, it affects generally all of us. But talking about individuals, when you see retrograde Mercury, there is an issue or a problem related to these significations of Mercury, which we see, which we just discussed, like a person may not or may find it challenging to gather intellect. There could be challenges related to business. There could be challenges related to especially traders, because trading comes under the purview of Mercury. The stock markets, there could be reverse direction movement of the stock market, meaning which, you know, the investment may not fructify the way a person may have planned it. Humor may get a little non-humorous, or rather ugly sometimes. So speech, there could be problems related to speech. So whenever there is a retrograde Mercury, there could be problems related to its significations. That's number one. Now, Mercury is a planet which is closest to the sun, and the maximum it can go away from sun is 27 degrees from the sun, both sides. So it stays within one house behind the sun or ahead of the sun, or sometimes it's in the same zodiac sign, so it becomes kind of combust at times as well. And combustion is not good anyways. So we're not talking about combustion today. We're talking about when it gets retrograde, you see problems related to the significations of Mercury, which we just discussed about: intellect, trading, business, stock markets, speech, so on, and humor, so on and so forth. And so there are times when between this 27 degrees ahead and 27 degrees behind of sun, it moves into a direct motion, and sometimes it goes into a retrograde motion. So and of course, this is, like I said, in real life it does not go backwards, it appears to go backwards. So these challenges are felt in general when transits occur, and also to people whose birth chart Mercury gets retrograde at the time of their birth. So these are the challenges felt by those people throughout their lives. So they have to be pretty careful on those issues. Now, the question here is that what if Mercury, a favorable planet for that individual whom we are discussing, does a retrograde Mercury still give adverse results? That is one question. The second question is, the ancient scriptures have described, they have not described it generally about the retrogression that it is bad. They have described situations that retrogression of planets can be bad and may not be bad as well. It could be good rather as well. So a lot of astrologers have been saying as a general rule that retrogression is always bad. Well, that is not true. And it is not true especially also in the case of Mercury, which we are discussing. Well, retrogression is a point of a planet when that planet gets closest to the Earth. So a lot of astrologers says that when planets get retrograde, they get strong. No, they don't get strong. They are at a point at their retrogression points where they are closest to the Earth. So what happens in that process is that their influence on humans gets increased multifold just because they are close. It's logic, right? So it's not that if they get strong, their strength is the same, but the influence of humans are most. Now, like I just explained to you, ancient sages and scriptures have explained that retrogression is not bad always, and there are rules when retrogression is bad, and there are rules when retrogression is good as well. So do not generalize it. Like I just mentioned, there are astrologers who are saying that retrogression is always bad. So it is not bad, since their influence increases on the humans multifold. So if a planet is good for that person, so logically speaking as well, leaving aside the ancient scriptures, that planet should be good for that individual because it's influencing even more powerfully because of its distance from the Earth is closest. So it'll influence it even more. And also, if it's good, it's going to give a good influence. So one has to be extremely careful, and I'm not going to get into those details today. I will have a video later on as to in what circumstances a retrograde planet becomes favorable and what circumstances a retrograde planet does not get favorable. But for now, I've explained you one, that what is retrogression? It's an illusion. Two, that only 5 planets can get retrograde. 3, about Mercury, it can go as much as 27 degrees from Sun. It stays closest to the Sun. So whenever it's closest to the Earth, it is extremely strong. Not because it's strong in itself or its strength increases, but because its influence on the humans increases because it's the closest to the Earth at that point when it's retrograde. And fourth, that not always retrograde planets are unfavorable. There could be circumstances, or there could be situation, there could be points when retrograde planets can become extremely favorable, and Mercury is also not an exception to that rule. There could be points when retrograde Mercury can be favorable as well. So all the favorable effects and unfavorable effects I've already discussed as to what the significations of Mercury are, what will it affect, and also along with the significations, what houses Mercury is ruling, that also will be affected. Those houses and their significations are also going to be affected whenever Mercury gets favorable or unfavorable, depending on the rules which we apply when retrograde planets get favorable or unfavorable. So hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I will be back with my series on retrograde planets in my next session. And in the meanwhile, I will recommend subscribe to my channel and check out my website. There is a link below, and I will see you soon. Thank you.